We are very, very pleased to have brought together three experts who collectively offer deep experiences in science communications, journalism, digital transformation, and AI. Their perspectives will help us take lessons from scientific fields on how we as public finance professionals can rethink our approaches to communicating budgets, especially in an information ecosystem increasingly mediated by AI. Let me briefly introduce our three speakers or three panel participants. First, there's Dr. Simon Piatek, founder of the New Imagination Lab and formerly with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Simon works at the intersection of science, public policy, and communication, helping organizations translate complex evidence into narratives that people can understand, engage with, and act upon. We are also joined by Adriana Whiteley, Director of FP Strategies at the Financial Times. Adriana advises governments and institutions on how to communicate complex policy issues in a fast-changing media environment, drawing on deep experience with journalism, audience insight, and digital transformation. And finally, Sian Crucefix, Communications Manager at the Lancet Group. Sian leads communications on some of the world's most high-profile scientific research for the prestigious Lancet journal, with a focus on clarity, credibility, and communicating scientific evidence for decision makers. The first one is sort of an overall question. What challenges have you faced in communicating science findings in recent years, and how did you overcome them? Sort of a nice lead questions for us today. And if Sian, I could maybe invite you to start.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Jan, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's great to be here. I think there are several challenges and too many to mention, but I'll focus on two that are most relevant for this audience, and that is communicating nuance in information environments that don't reward it necessarily, and what I'm going to call jargonese. But I think in finance circles, it's also the curse of knowledge is another way of putting it. So science deals in confidence intervals, limitations, converging evidence, and that needs unpacking. What's worked for us is layering information. So capturing attention first and then building depth. And then on jargonese, science, like finance, is a bit like a dialect. And I think that's a nice way of conceptualizing it. It needs that translation. And the core idea here, I think, is that information can only become knowledge when people can process, interpret, and apply it. And one way of doing that is by actively reviewing communications for jargonese and anticipating questions and concerns. But all of that is happening in this environment where we do have an overabundance of information. I think this is something that Adriana can perhaps come in on as well, where we're thinking about communicating to audiences that are experiencing this overwhelm. So it's this sense of how do we build trust with all of that going on in the background? And Adriana, I wonder if you've got thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Sian. I think one of the things is that most of our work is, we work with hundreds of publishers worldwide on how to build engagement, serve new audiences, and work with AI. And I think one of the things that you need to understand now is that a lot of your readers, if not most of them, are going to be bots. So when you're trying to communicate nuance, it's slightly more difficult now because AI hates nuance. So it tends to oversimplify whatever you say. So whatever is on one side this, on the other side that economists love to put in their reports, is going to be erased and going to be oversimplified, and God knows where they're going to take the information from. But the whole core of the value that we provide is trust for both of the publishers and governments, and how to communicate that is very important because we have an audience that is increasingly being trained to be a bit more skeptical or avoiding news in general, information in general, because it's just bad news and they find it difficult to follow. So I think if we're moving to Simon here on what is his point of view there.
Yes, thank you, Adriana. And I'll actually start with, I think, Sean, you put it really well, that science needs translation. And for a very long time, certainly for me, when I was leading the Vaccine Confidence Project, the digital arm of it, we were campaigning during that time, we saw that really well. But what's really interesting and what has changed in the last 3 years, it's not just translation from scientists to the general public or policymakers. Increasingly, we're seeing that there's a new middleman here, that's basically artificial intelligence and those LLMs. Increasingly, people are using. So we also need to be able to translate science to LLM language, so that when people then ask questions to those models, they get the right answer. So in short, if you ask me about sort of two main challenges in the recent years, the first one, it will be linked with AI models and the emergence of that as a communication channel, essentially. And we know there's issues there. AI models, they hallucinate, they create fake sources. They often like to please us, even if they don't know the answer. They're trying to come up with the answer. And when it comes to communicating science, this is simply not acceptable. So there is an issue there, and I'm sure we'll talk about possible solutions here as well. But the other thing that I wanted to also mention is the way we understand truth. I think I might be referring to a very similar concept that you talked about, which you define as trust. This has changed. So in not so recent times, truth or trust, they were coming from a single source or maybe two or three sources. These were the governments or the church or other organizations. Things have changed massively these days. There's many sources of truth, and not all of them are human sources. So, AI is definitely one of them. And it is absolutely crucial when we're communicating that we are engaging with all those sources and all those actors that are playing this field, because by engaging with just a single one of them, namely, for example, government, we're not going to be able to build the trust of our audiences, and we're not going to be able to sort of get to the truth as those audiences understand it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is a nice segue into our next question, which is, what have you learned about how to effectively communicate complex information into something that people actually understand and act upon? So maybe, Simon, it's natural for you to continue in this.
Yes, I'll actually go back a little bit again to the days of working on the vaccination campaigns and programs during the COVID pandemic. If you ask me about one or a single most important lesson that we've learned, actually, I'll talk about two. So the first one would be, it never works from top to the bottom. It needs to be bottom up. We need to be able to understand what people care about, and then we need to be able to address those issues. So to make it more specific to this audience here, when communicating complex fiscal or budget issues, it's not enough to talk about abstract concepts. We need to be talking about how relevant that is for the public and for people who are engaging with this type of content. And secondly, and this is like the lesson that we learned, it is the outcome-based framing. So when we were talking about vaccines, obviously we saw immediately that showing a doctor's surgery with people being vaccinated and those syringes and the very act of being vaccinated, that didn't work. It caused a lot of controversies. Whereas when we started talking about the actual outcome of being vaccinated, for example, someone being able to go to the beach or go on a holiday, that was very, very different. We could see that audiences were engaging with that. So that just illustrates how these sort of very complex scientific ideas, when presented as outcome and what they actually, as a result of them, people might get, the results of those campaigns are actually so much better.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Sian, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I do. And echoing what Simon said, I mean, a big learning for many of us and for institutions is that institutions still matter, but they don't have this automatic authority. And to Simon's point, it's no longer top-down communication. It is very much networked. And for a long time, we focused on the message, but who carries it and how it travels now matter just as much. And another side of this is that people engage through multiple identities, and that's something that we forget sometimes. So we're not just citizens, we might also be parents or fans or patients. And so communication has to feel relevant and not generic. And with AI coming in more and more, it's getting more personalized. So a good example that I have, it's not necessarily complex scientific information, but it does involve behavior change, is from the NHS, and they linked cervical cancer screening to a Harry Styles album launch, making it accessible and timely and driving engagement in the comments. There was a lot of community engagement among young women talking to one another, and that's exactly the type of interaction you want to see. And in finance, because I can imagine some of you thinking, okay, that's an example, but how will we do something like that? It was the Netherlands Central Planning Bureau who did an off-the-charts visual on public debt, and they showed the bar going off the chart. It's simple, but it's effective because of this slight unexpected levity. And that's what helps the message travel. It's a slightly different, creative way of thinking about it.
All right. And Adriana.
Yeah, I think if you allow me to add there a little bit on the finance bit, we've done quite a lot of research with younger audiences to understand how they read information, what are the problems that they find, and we found that, and the Reuters Institute as well this week also published a document around the avoidance of news and the reasons for that, and it found the same thing. The younger population just doesn't understand what you're talking about, even on the news, which is supposed to be translated for them. So one of the things that we've done is that we allow more explainers, simpler language, and trying to not presume that they understand what you're talking about, but explaining every concept, not being very paternalistic or just not patronizing them very much, but just trying to explain as if it's starting from scratch. And the engagement with younger audiences that we've been finding on the FT is quite impressive. And it's quite interesting how also we tend to give a bad rap onto the younger audiences and think that they don't consume news. They do consume news, but not necessarily the way that you want them to consume news. They will be listening to influencers, and they will go deeper and deeper. So when they are interested in something, they will go research that into several sources until they actually create their own picture of that subject.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So given how media has transformed in recent years, how do we need to evolve communications? You want to start with us, Sian?
I would actually like to come in after Adriana, I think, given that
Right.
I think it's a good one for media to start.
I guess that makes perfect sense, Adriana.
I think the first thing is that, bots are part of your readers and you have to cater for them as well. They're not very attentive readers, so that's the first thing that you have to do, and we're going to talk about that maybe later on. And the second is that you have to reach that audience the way that they want to be reached. The first thing is to be short, especially if you're communicating complex, long research subjects, reports on finance and budgets, etc. It's posting it on the social media, small, short, often having volume, but not overburdening people with information at each one, because there will be a constellation of sources of information that will be contributing to that. So the more you can be clear on your communications and short and often, that's the first thing to do. I think the second thing is that you can test, and that's the beauty of having feedback on reading and usage on a live on how do you publish them. So you could actually check what is the headlines, what are the way that you're communicating the information that is getting the most traction. And I think there are several ways that we do that in publishing, either A/B testing, but also checking, going back to what you published before, and use metrics. Like we use one that is called quality reads, which is measuring how much of that article people read, and it's a very good indicator to say what is you need to change, because if people stop this at the first beginning of the article, that means that it's just too complicated to read or it's not clear enough. So that's the first thing to do. So let's move to Sean now. Let's see what you have to add.
Yeah, the reason I did it that way is because, I mean, maybe this is a slightly unexpected way to think about it, but well, first, there's this well-known phrase that the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that's taken place, right? And I think that's becoming more relevant as our information environments fragment, and institutions are good at publishing, but do they really know whether they've been understood? It's a question I think we're all grappling with quite a bit at the moment. And in the past, signals like social listening that we relied upon can only been taken as partial nowadays because of what we've discussed here about bots and inauthentic accounts, and also this idea that I'm hearing more and more about the silent majority on social media platforms. And I suspect quite a lot of you here today, you're on social media, but you don't necessarily actively engage. So one of the ways that we need to evolve communications is also in our assessment methods. I think we need to combine them and do things like surveys, get direct community feedback, ideally get community co-creation in what we're producing, and treat social media data, online data as one input, but not the full picture. Because in the policy context, in the finance policy context, I think that can risk responding or perhaps designing policy that is for the loudest voice, but not necessarily the majority. So the assessment piece is something that we need to think about. But I'll go to Simon now on the AI side.
Thank you. You've pretty much covered it. Especially Adriana, a comment from you that when you think about your audience, you think that a large portion of your audience are bots, and you need to think about this audience as well. And I think it was late last year that Wikipedia, they published some internal research about the audience that they are getting, and increasingly they are seeing very similar audience. That's essentially machines or LLMs reading Wikipedia and then generating the answers based on that. So I guess my comment would be that things have changed massively with ChatGPT and other models, and they are now the new Google, or they are the new search engines. So, and there's a big difference between search engines, even the specialized one, you know, Google Scholar that was used for academic searches, or other specialized engines. They don't really provide us with links for us to go and follow those links and read those news articles or scientific articles. They actually provide us with interpretation. And that is very significant for publishers and for communicators, because if we don't give it enough information, if we don't give it enough credible information, those models will start finding that information somewhere else. And that might not be the correct sources. There might be sources that not necessarily present that information in a correct way. And with that, obviously, I don't want to start that conversation here, but the entire risk of, you know, mis and disinformation and how that interpretation is provided and how this works. But in short, AI did change a lot in how we communicate, and I think we need to, when we're analyzing the new media landscape, we need to look at from the perspective that AI is a very powerful middleman when it comes to media consumption now, and we need to be looking into that.
Absolutely. And our next question specifically focused on, my next question is, how is AI impacting the communication landscape? So whoever wants to take that first.
Well, I can start, and then you guys can complete. I think the first way that AI is acting on that is a competitor for attention. So I think a lot of AI enables lots of things, and I think that one of the things that enables quite well is cheap information and cheap articles at scale, and it enables a whole industry of misinformation that monetizes misinformation in general, not necessarily malicious, but it's just a business. So government information is especially good for that because it is everywhere. People listen to it with half attention. So as soon as you publish, let's say, a budget, and you mentioned that there will be some changes on, for instance, the way that religious schools are going to be taxed, let's say, there will be networks of sites that will automatically pick up schools' religion, and they will produce tens of different versions of articles automatically because they're already trained on what makes a good audience and got good copy for them. And they will pick up on different versions of, let's say, children won't be, that pray at school will be expelled. Religious schools are going to be closed. And those articles are going to be spread around the internet, automatic videos of them. Some of them will be viral, and some of them will generate lots of money for those people. So as an official communicator, you're competing with that, and you're trying to make it not happen as well by making it clear as possible in your headlines that what is the full picture and what is you can't bury the lead anymore because this misinformation will be picked up and changed. And I think the second way is that the one that Simon already mentioned about how AI is an intermediary, and it's of course it's writing for AI, but also understanding that AI, unfortunately, has been trained on the internet, and the internet is full of rubbish. So it will pick that up, these narratives that fill the internet, and we'll put that into the answers as well, in a way that might be attributed to you as well. So you have to be careful with that. And the more clarity you have, the more clear is your executive summary, self-contained. You don't communicate nuance on footnotes because these will be ignored. There'll be lots of practical ways that probably Simon can go through a little bit more. And even some of those things are useful for human readers as well. So before you publish, I think the first thing would be to try to put that into an LLM, all of the LLMs actually, and ask the questions that you think your audiences would ask, because the output of that will be the message that people will read, including, I'm afraid to say, lots of journalists as well, especially the journalist ones that will be in a rush to get the article out. They will be reading it through an LLM and getting the key points of that document. So I think the third way would be helping yourselves on how to use AI to make these communications more widely available, either through transcripts, summaries, personalization. There's a lot that AI can do on your day-to-day, and we've worked with hundreds of publishers already implementing that responsibly on their newsrooms. And it does hallucinate. We have to manage for that, and always have a human in the loop, but there is a lot that it can help as well. So I'll move on to Simon, who I'm sure has lots of experience on that as well.
Thank you, Adriana. And I think listening to you, I was just thinking maybe even it might sound a little bit philosophical, but when we publishing anything, that is, when you do that as FT, or like for our audience today, if you're publishing your budgets or comments about budgets or any documents about fiscal policy, or applies to you, Sian, as well, in scientific publication, we tend to think about whatever we publish as content. But in reality, in this new world, sort of post-2023, this world with AI, it actually becomes a part of infrastructure, a part of, immediately becomes a source rather than a piece of content that is consumed on its own. And what I mean by that, I might just be repeating myself a little bit because I gave sort of brief overview of that, answering the previous question. Pre-2023, people would go to whatever search engine you had online, either social media, Facebook search, X search, or any, traditional search engine, Google or Bing. You'd go search for the term, say, budget for 2026. You would get a list of answers. And these were ordered specifically by the algorithms. There's obviously discussions how, that ordering happens. That's a different story. But people would then go to those sources, to those links, and educate themselves by reading them. Increasingly, as people are more and more relying on AI search engines, which we call interpretation engines rather than search engines, those links are available on some of them if you specifically ask for them or if you bothered to click on the link. But in reality, the answer is given to us, to all of us, already with interpretation based on those sources. So the landscape, the communication landscape has changed a lot, that increasingly, and this, as I said, it applies to all of us. We need to start thinking about whatever we put out there online, not just as content that will be consumed by humans, by people, read as the original document that we provided, but it will be read and mediated by the machine, and then the interpretation will be provided within that little box of whatever LLM people are using. Is going in that direction, and I think we need to be able to address that in the future. Over to you, Sian.
Yeah, I think to add, it's also what we do with that interpretation once we get it from a large language model, I think, as well. Because I've been thinking whether one of the differentiators is also the human relationship side, because we do have a little bit this paradoxical relationship with AI at the moment, where we both trust what's coming out of it because of this machine heuristic, but also distrust what's coming out of it. And we're seeing this in surveys. So for communicators, I think don't go for one without the other. So yes, invest in building this infrastructure and tailoring your content so it can get picked up by AI. But at the same time, in how you're communicating on social media platforms, for example, invest in building that parasocial relationship, whether you're doing that through putting out short videos of your people doing the explainers, etc. Because I don't think at the moment we can have one without the other while we're in this sort of liminal space working out what is going to happen in the next few years. So that's my thought on how AI is impacting the communications landscape.
A huge thanks to our speakers, Simon, Adriana, Sian. This has just been absolutely wonderful. And if I were to share two takeaways from this, one is just the absolute importance of AI, that this is shaping all aspects of communications. And secondly, just sort of how quickly this is moving and how we must learn from others around the world in doing this. That it's absolutely fascinating. So thank you again all very much. And as I said at the beginning, this is the first in a new round of speaker series with upcoming conversations on trust, messaging around fiscal reforms, working with intermediaries, and new approaches to engaging with the public. We look very much to seeing you all in the future with us at upcoming events. So again, thank you for joining us, and good afternoon from Paris.